The air felt heavy with unspoken dread. A city, once vibrant and alive, now cowered under a blanket of fear. This is the story of that fear, a chilling symphony conducted by a maestro of the macabre. It's a journey into the abyss of the human soul, a descent into the heart of darkness where monsters are made, not born. Our story begins, not under the cloak of night as one might expect, but on a day like any other. The sun was shining, children were playing, and life went on as usual. Yet, unbeknownst to the unsuspecting populace, a shadow had begun to spread, cast by an evil lurking just around the corner. This is the story of that shadow, the story of a man named Adrian. Adrian wasn't born a monster, though his beginnings were far from idyllic. A childhood marred by neglect and abuse had sown the seeds of darkness in his young heart. Those seeds, left untended, germinated and grew, warping his perception of the world and those in it. His purpose, if it could be called that, wasn't born out of grand ambition or a lust for power, but from a much simpler, primal need, to inflict the pain he himself knew so well. Adrian's story isn't one of a sudden explosive descent into madness. It was a slow, insidious progression, like ivy gradually engulfing a once proud structure. His early years were marked by a chilling detachment, an emptiness where empathy and compassion should have been. There was a coldness in his gaze that unsettled even those who knew him best, a sense that he existed apart from the world, observing it with detached curiosity rather than truly living in it. Animals, those creatures most vulnerable to human cruelty, were his first victims. Small birds, stray cats, their lives snuffed out with a casual indifference that sent chills down the spines of those who witnessed it. Yet these early acts of brutality were dismissed as mere childhood cruelty, a phase he would grow out of. How wrong, how tragically wrong they were. As Adrian grew older, so too did the darkness within him. The casual cruelty towards animals morphed into something more sinister, a fascination with death and the act of taking a life. He began to fantasize about control, about the power he would wield over his victims. The line between fantasy and reality blurred, and the stage was set for a tragedy that would forever stain the city's soul. The first murder sent shockwaves through the city. A young woman full of life and vitality was found brutally murdered in a secluded park. The brutality of the crime, its sheer savagery, chilled even the most hardened investigators to the bone. Whispers of a monster on the loose, a predator stalking the streets, began to circulate. Fear, like a virus, spread. Parents clutched their children close, locks were checked twice, and once familiar streets took on a menacing air. The city, once a symphony of life, now held its breath, united in fear of the unknown. Adrian, however, felt no remorse, no guilt. Instead, a perverse sense of satisfaction began to bloom within him. He had tasted power, the intoxicating rush of control over another human being, and he craved more. The city, oblivious to the evil in its midst, continued its daily routine, unaware that it had become the hunting ground of a monster. The second murder followed soon after, then a third, each more brutal, more audacious than the last. The victims, seemingly chosen at random, had only one thing in common. They were all young women, their lives tragically cut short. The city was gripped by terror, the authorities seemingly powerless to stop the reign of terror. Adrian reveled in the fear he inspired. He meticulously studied the news reports, the frantic scramble to understand his motives, the growing panic that gripped the city. It fueled his dark desires, validated his sense of power. He was no longer just a shadow. He was the darkness itself, and the city was his to command. He left behind subtle clues, macabre calling cards that mocked the authorities' efforts. A single black rose placed carefully on the body of one victim, an enigmatic note left at the scene of another. He was playing a deadly game, toying with the very people tasked with stopping him, and he was winning.